All right, I'm Michael Hartzman. Today is January 7th, 2025, and I'm on as always with my partner, Dominic Tavella. Happy New Year, Dominic. How are you? Good to see you.
Doing well, Mike. Happy New Year to you and all our listeners and clients. And here we go again, a brand new year.
A brand new year filled with optimism and anxiety simultaneously. Welcome to being a financial advisor.
Yeah, the most common question, of course, is what do you think about going forward? As if that changed from a week ago or a month ago or a year ago, right, Mike? When does the carousel ever stop? So around and around we go, and it's all new and it's all the same. Here we go.
Exactly. But you know what? Let me quote the late great New York Mets announcer Bob Murphy, and let me give you the happy recap of 2024 because it was a productive year. I'll start with the least performing one and lead up to the best performing one. Dominic, the Dow Jones in 2024 was up 16.31%. The S&P 500 was up 28.06%, and the Nasdaq was up a very, very robust 35.44%. And a fun fact, the S&P was up 20% 2 years in a row for the first time since 1995 and 1996. So we can't take these 20% moves for granted. They don't happen back to back that often.
Yeah, it's kind of a rare feat for the markets to be up 20% plus 2 years in a row. And you did bring up the dates back into the late 90s. And unfortunately, we ended up paying the price for that because there was a lot of speculation in that market. We don't quite see that in this market. And we certainly don't think a 20% 2025 is in the cards. But 2 years in a row is a pretty good return after the pain that we all suffered in 2022. So it's nice to make that money back, Mike, and be a little bit ahead of the game now.
And look, as you said, here we are back on the merry-go-round a year ago. And I always like to ask clients when they call me up with, the headline of the day and the worry of the day, I say to them, what were we worried about a year ago? And more often than not, they don't remember, right? A year ago, we were worried about a possible a recession. We were worried about when will the Feds finally start to lower interest rates. We were worried about an election and not having a clear-cut winner. And through all of that
And the big
fear,
I word, Mike, inflation. We were
inflation.
worried about inflation, right? And go ahead, Mike. I'll let you finish your thought.
No, but I mean, but in spite of all of that, the market just kind of floated up, right? It wasn't a straight shot. It just kind of crept along, and very quietly at the end of the year, here we are with this, a 28% gain, which is remarkable.
Yeah, and we don't want to do a complete recap of last year, Mike, but it is stark how we literally was sitting here in January of 2024, and the average analyst, equity expert, economist, recession, that was their biggest fear. They were so afraid that Fed tightening policies had gone too far, the economy was too restrictive. Not only was it not going to grow, Mike, but it was going to roll over and go into a recession. And
Yeah.
forget about 20% plus years in the markets. We were talking about negative year in the market. And obviously that didn't come to pass. And so if we had followed those people's advice, and these are very, very smart people, we would have been left out of the market. We would have left maybe sitting in a treasury bill or a money market the whole year. And we would have missed out on probably one of the best years we've had in a long time.
Yep. Yep. And those the same experts are also predicting 7 interest rate cuts
Yeah.
starting in February. I think we got 3 or 4. It didn't start until I think midsummer. So, look, everyone's trying their best. Everyone's giving an educated guess, basically, based on the information we all have. But at the end of the day, we just really have to look at the data almost, as it comes in and not try to make these long-term bets, Dominic, because it's impossible.
Look, we joke all the time about having a crystal ball that works. I know it's a running joke with all of us, but the reality is your analogy to the weather report is really most suitable, right? We're trying to forecast, we're trying to plan, and we have to bob and weave. We have to adapt the portfolio and the plan to whatever comes in our direction. And I think both of us are feeling pretty good about 2025. But to think that we're just going to close our eyes and do another 20% year is just silly. I just think it's absolutely silliness.
And look, at nothing would make me happier. We look back a year from now, and that's what happened. But 2025, we don't go into the year without things to worry about. God forbid. We always, when we don't have anything to worry about, we worry about not having anything to worry
Yeah,
about.
that probably is the most true comment on your part, Mike. If you wake up in the morning, you have nothing to worry about. My God, you really should start worrying, right? So with a new administration coming in at the end of this month, technically, but they're already on a pretty fast pace to be fully functional and operating. New ideas about how and what we should be doing and how the economy should function, taxation, regulation. There's a lot of stuff on the plate here, Mike, and a lot for us to consider.
And there is this speculation that, if the Trump administration does all the things they're talking about right out of the box, to the extent they're talking about them, 60% tariffs on some countries, a tariff on Canada and Mexico, our direct neighbors, millions of people deported, deregulating the government. All those things by themselves are inflationary. Taken together, they're phenomenally inflationary. I know you like to say that Trump carries a big stick, but that is a worry. I think the Federal Reserve, Dom, which made an announcement since we've done our last podcast, saying we're going to take Trump at his word at the moment and tapping the brakes on interest rate cuts. And I agree with you. I don't think Trump will do everything to the extent he's threatening to do them. But the Fed, is hedging. The Fed is basically taking out an insurance policy and saying we're going to take a wait and see approach for at least 4 to 6 months. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I don't know if they get to 4 months or even six, Mike. I think we're going to get a pretty good indication. I think that this new administration is pretty adamant that they want to hit the ground running. So we should have, and I do expect some really significant market volatility as a result of it. But we should have a pretty good indication whether, tariffs against Canada and Mexico of 25%. How does that make any sense at all, right? You can see that more towards China, and certainly I think Europe is going to be in for their fair share of tariffs as they manage to tariff our goods. So we hope in the end it's targeted. We hope at the end it's reciprocal. How are you treating us is how we're going to treat you. But where Canada and Mexico, as an example, deserve 25% tariffs is kind of shocking to me. And on the inflation front, Mike, again, you love when I use the word wonky, so I'll keep it short. But we have an environment in Europe where the economy is not actually doing well at all, and China potentially even worse. What that means is they will export lower cost goods to the United States, and that's de-inflationary. So I think the inflationary front in itself will work out a little bit over time, but it will work out in our favor. And we hope that the tariffs don't become really prohibitive from an economic growth perspective.
And look, and I said it on our last show, credit to the Republicans. They really got elected on hammering home this whole idea that the whole economy is a mess. It's not, but inflation's got to get under control. It's come down. And I don't think that Trump is going to do anything proactively to reflate the economy. I'm sorry, reflate inflation. He certainly doesn't want that to be his legacy this first year of his second term.
Yeah, and even on the deportation front, they've certainly and still talk about mass deportations, but then when you start getting into the nitty-gritty, they're talking about criminals, Mike. They believe that certain elements shouldn't be, gang members should not be in this country and have no legal right to be in a country in the first place. But they're going to be pretty aggressively looking to move that segment out. And I think that noise will keep others from coming in. But I don't see a mass deportation. I don't think this country would stand for it, Mike. So, as a population, though, we're incredibly sensitive to other people and helping people. And I don't believe this country would stand for
Well, look, while we're deporting foreign criminals, let's deport the American criminals as well, right? No one's going to argue
that.
with get rid of criminals.
If you find a country to take them, I guarantee that Trump would probably have no problems.
I don't think any look as divisive as he is. I don't think anyone would disagree about that one.
But
Um,
listen, putting a bow on it, Mike, that all means we really have to pay attention. And whatever happened yesterday is done, it's finished, and all we can think about is going forward. How do we position our portfolios to hopefully take advantage of the circumstances, the cards that are dealt in our direction?
and speaking of going forward, good segue for me. Thank you. Tonight's guest is a returning guest, one of our original guests. I remember we did our first show with him. We were all in our basements. It was like towards the middle of COVID when we started the podcast, and we were all in our basements. And Harold wanted to make sure his dogs weren't barking. So I don't know. He could have been in his laundry room in the catacombs of his home, for all I know. But we have Harold Bollaci, who's a friend of ours, who's a very successful trust and estate attorney on Long Island. And this is an important show tonight, Dom, not only to do an estate planning update, but all the estate tax laws are set to sunset at the end of this year. There's going to be a lot of ink spilled and a lot of talking heads talking about what Congress might do for the estate and tax laws. And we're going to get some input from Harold on, what he thinks might happen and maybe perhaps what he thinks should happen.
And let's be honest, Mike, because we all kind of slip into this part of life where we're so busy with life and kids and grandkids and marriages, and God forbid you get to play around the golf, but we don't pay attention to those little details regarding our financial plan and beneficiaries and wills. So you're starting the year fresh. It's a good idea. Let's talk about it out loud on this show, and when we're done, let's all kind of pull out the pieces of paper and check and make sure everything is done correctly.
Exactly. So let's take a break and we will be right back with Harold Bollaci, attorney at law. All right, I'm Michael Hartzman, back with my partner Dominick Tavella, with our guest this evening, returning guest, great friend of both of us, Harold Bollaci. How are you? Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Great to be back. Thanks for having me on the show.
Happy New Year, Harold. Welcome
Thanks,
aboard.
Don. Thanks, Don.
So Harold, let's start with what you just said on the break as the to-do list. Dom alluded to it's a great time to kind of make sure all your paperwork is in order, all your beneficiaries are up to date, your executor is still alive, stuff like that. So what are the most important things our clients and listeners could do as it relates to getting that 2025 to-do list in order?
Well, I love it because it's the turn of the year, so doing some estate planning should be on your action item list for the new year. And for those who haven't done any planning, now's the opportunity. If you think you've done some planning in the past or you have done planning in the past, it's a great time to review your documents. Like Dom said, take the binder out of the drawer and make sure that your beneficiaries are current, the fiduciaries are current. But specifically, if you haven't done estate planning, or even if you have, get your affairs in order. Put the family playbook together. Start with the basics. I look at estate planning as a bit of a pyramid, and we start with the person, and we do a healthcare proxy, followed by a power of attorney, a last will and testament, and As you know, I love trust, so I'm all about doing trust planning for our clients. Um, so that's a great time to have those conversations and start thinking about what you have, where is it, who gets it, and who's in charge. Those are some really important questions to think about if this is on your to-do list
So
for
Harold, just
2025.
purposely try to use the KISS method, keep it simple, smart method.
Yeah.
So you took estate planning to clients, their eyes roll the back of their head, right? So like, well, who do you just want to leave your stuff to, right? Let's
Right.
keep it simple. Who do you want to leave your stuff to? And like, well, I really haven't done any estate planning. Well, did you name beneficiaries on your IRAs? That's estate planning, right?
Yep.
Should we check it? Should we update it? Once a
And I
year, you should do that, right? So let's go through some of the other items that you think people should be checking their beneficiaries on.
Well, so I love that. I'm obsessed with beneficiary designations. I parrot you guys all the time. First thing you do after you consult with the attorney, call your advisor and say, who's the beneficiary on my IRA? Anything, your qualified, non-qualified accounts, bank accounts, because what happens is we go through the effort of doing the planning and you forget these little items and you might as well have not signed your documents because that was the whole point. So check in on your healthcare proxy. Does it reflect your wishes regarding end of life care? A lot of people's thoughts about end of life care have changed and evolved after and during COVID about the thought of being put on a ventilator. Very important. Healthcare proxies should not be overlooked. You want to write down important aspects of how you want to leave this world, really, and the type of care and treatment that you want. Um, where else do you have beneficiary designations, insurance
How
policy,
about life insurance policy?
checking accounts, life insurance, annuities, any of the instruments and products that Lebenthal offers, along with every other financial services firm, should be checked on. Savings accounts, joint accounts. I know together we've seen people leave beneficiaries on, and then someone goes and passes away, and their ex-husband is the beneficiary of the life insurance. And what do you do?
Sorry, Mike, how about pension plans at work? People designate a spouse as the beneficiary of their pension plan, and they get divorced during a 20, 30, 40-year cycle, and they never update the beneficiary information.
Absolutely. And as our work careers evolve and we go from firm to firm, you start your career when you're a young man and who you're putting down as your beneficiary, your mom and dad probably. You got to go back and add spouses and kids and make sure that it's current and it runs with you. But this is also a good time to address um, other little contingencies. Are there individuals in your life who need special attention when you pass away, or who should not be included in your estate plan? Um, are there people with special needs that you want to pay attention to? Uh, Pets, any number of things. We want to keep it simple, but we need to look at some of the important things to you. What's important to you? And what don't you want to sacrifice upon your death? It's really important to check up on this. I like the idea of a family playbook. Get a book, write down. This is my primary residence. My IRA is with Lebenthal. I have a bank account at Chase. These are my passwords. Safe deposit boxes. Who gets the dog? Friend of mine is 80 years
Mike
old.
gets my dog.
Mike's getting your dog. A friend of mine just got a new cat, and the cat's going to outlive her. And I said, who's going to get the cat? I don't want her to leave too soon, but odds are this cat's going to outlive her. Who gets the cat?
Well, I know who got the cat. You're getting the cat.
I'm getting the cat. I'm
Yeah,
allergic.
I know who got that cat.
Yeah,
So mazel tov on your new
exactly.
cat.
But those are important things. And not to go too far down into it, I'm a sentimental person. So I like to say to people, if you don't want it thrown in a dumpster, you might want to write some things down. Michael, I'm looking at your wall behind you, and I know you're a collector and I'm a collector. It doesn't necessarily have to have value. This is something your grandparents brought from another country. Maybe you don't want it thrown out. Not that people honor wishes, but the more we write down contemporaneously, the easier it is. And
An insurance company I used to do business with used to give Dom and I a book. It was actually called um, A Love Letter, and it
yeah,
was exactly what you just described.
right.
And unfortunately, they stopped printing them. But you mentioned something earlier about, you know, do you have anyone in your life with special needs? And as I got more experience in this business, and I know Dominic experienced the same thing, I became a lot less reluctant to ask every single client, do you have any children or grandchildren with any bad habits? Do they have a gambling addiction? Do they have, do they have any type of drug addiction, right? Um, are they mentally handicapped? Are they physically handicapped? And you know what? Until I asked that question, that information was never going to be forthcoming. And I could see a couple look at each other. I could read their body language to know I'm about to get a yes answer, right?
Yeah, well, for a lot of people, it's a source of embarrassment, especially if it's substance abuse. And going back to when we all started our careers, I think I noticed a lot of parents who had children with special needs were reluctant to talk about their children. And one thing that I thought was interesting was they weren't talking to each other. So they weren't sharing information with parents who had children who were similarly situated. I think we've come a long way in in having those conversations and being far more comfortable. Um, Maybe I'm naive, but it surprises me. There are a lot of people with a lot of issues out there, a lot of adults with substance abuse issues, meant to your point, mental health issues, and that's okay, but they need to be taken care of. And too much money can put them at risk, and it could certainly put your money at risk. So
Harold, I have clients who have children who either are currently or were previously incarcerated,
certainly
you know? So let's talk a
not
little bit about,
uncommon. Yeah.
let's talk about that for a minute and describe what a special needs trust is, because that's the tool commonly used when we bump into someone who has these type of concerns, correct?
Absolutely. I love special needs trusts. Some people call them supplemental needs trusts. They're a really big part of our practice. But so by definition, it's a trust whereby the person who creates the trust is allowed to set aside money for an individual who by definition may have a special need. And that category is extremely broad. It doesn't necessarily have to do with a cognitive disorder. Um, Anybody who's on some type of disability is considered to qualify for a special needs trust. And what this mechanism allows is, for example, you're doing your estate plan and one of your adult children um, may have a special need, may be on SSI, DSI, may live in a group home. This allows you to leave money to that person without interfering with their entitlement benefits. So if somebody's on Medicaid, SSI in a group home, you're allowed to leave money, and that money can be used to enhance their lifestyle. And uh, I think most people interpret the regulations quite broadly. So, for example, if you have a autistic son and going to Disney World 5 times a year improves that son's quality of life, then spend the money into that special needs trust. Anything that goes to benefit that person can you can use the money for any benefits. So it's very broad, but it protects the government benefits, and that's really important.
And that's really the important point of that. comment, right, Harold, is that sometimes you think you're doing a good thing and you want to leave something to your children or your grandchildren. And by doing that, in these cases, you actually would be jeopardizing benefits that the government would be providing them, whether it's not just a Social Security check, but housing and aids and assistance. So you don't want to put that benefit at risk.
Well, and also for those of us who are saving and prudently trying to manage our money, during our lifetimes, we're so careful. Why risk that chunk of money in death? Because not only is it going to interfere with the beneficiary's benefits, the government's going to use that money. So that money's going to get spent one way or the other. And most of us would perceive that expenditure as wasteful. So why open up this path for waste in your estate plan if you don't have to? And by the way, we should also say that these trusts, these special needs trusts, so you put money aside for an individual, that money then will pass after their death. So it also serves as a further mechanism to move money through the bloodline. So perhaps you give it to your son, and if your son doesn't have children, maybe when he passes, it goes to his sister or another relative. So it allows you to continue to control where that money goes after you've passed and after the beneficiary has passed.
So Harold, what type of legal document do you use if you have someone who, as we said earlier, has a bad habit, either a drug addiction or a gambling addiction? They're not on the government dime,
All
but we
right.
still need to save them from themselves, if you will. So what type of legal device or legal remedies do we have there?
So I build that into the document. I can build that into a last will and testament or within a revocable or irrevocable trust. And it's not uncommon to have language. I try not to call out people for their, I'll call it a disability or issue, but you'll say, if my son survives me, his share is to be held in trust, subject to the following. And the concern for most people, especially with a substance abuse problem, is you don't want to flood a beneficiary with money that they can go out and use to kill themselves. So it creates a system where a trustee is allowed to pay for housing, automobiles, food, shelter. It's just you're allowed to give the beneficiary the benefit of the money without giving them control over it. So we build that into the trust document, and it's a triggering item. And I'm always optimistic, and I say, look, this is how your wishes are today. Hopefully that person gets better and estate plans evolve. That's a really key point. And I think a part of our broader conversation is that we're talking about estate planning today as a to-do item, as an action item, but it's an evolutionary item. It's something that grows with you. To our point earlier, checking in on appointments of fiduciaries, people get better and maybe their money doesn't have to be restricted. So it gives the option to the trustee to say, okay, that guy got better. I think his parents will be okay if he gets his full inheritance today. So it evolves with you. And I have to tell you, it works. I've been doing this long enough that I've seen people inherit this way. And for the most part, it works.
So, Harold, just to continue growing this discussion, I have, I'm sure you do as well, Mike, clients where the children just aren't, and they don't have issues, they're not dealing with abuse, but they're not fiscally responsible. Some of our clients have a very substantial net worth, and leaving somebody who's not good with money, tens of millions of dollars, may not be the smartest thing to do.
Yeah. So you're restricted. So we talk a lot about minor beneficiary provisions in estate planning. And it's interesting, the definition of a minor under a minor beneficiary provision, for some people, that age goes up to 40 or 45. I have people say, I don't want my kid to get anything, or I don't want my kid to have control until he's 45. boy, 45 that's not young. But so you dole it out over time, you put people on an allowance. Um, you give it out in increments when people reach certain ages or achieve certain goals. Some of my clients, when they're talking about leaving money to people, okay, when you have a 4-year degree, you get 20% of the trust asset. When you get married and you want to buy a house, you get another 20%. So that's how you really mitigate overspending by people who just aren't prudent, because we've seen plenty of scenarios where people inherit a few $1 million and 18 months later they're calling us up saying, isn't there any money left?
Yeah,
No,
we've
we
seen
spent
that.
it all.
We've
Yeah, I
seen
mean, we've
that.
seen that. We've seen people go through millions in short order. And it's sad. It really is.
Harold, the most common question that we get, and I'm sure you get it as well, which I want to ask you before we go to a break. What is the difference between a revocable and an irrevocable trust?
It's my favorite question and one of my favorite subjects, as you know. So by definition, their titles give you what they mean. By definition, a revocable trust is a trust that you create and that you manage. So the analogy I make is it's like having the Hartzman family company and Michael's the president, and um, he set up a succession plan so that when you're not president anymore, who the next president is. They're tremendous vehicles for managing family assets, for acquiring real estate, either in one state or multiple states. And the beauty of revocable trusts, of all trusts, is there will substitutes. So what does that mean? They supersede your last will and testament. They avoid probate in your primary jurisdiction and possibly ancillary probate if you have assets in other states. So I love revocable trusts for that reason. They're great devices to consolidate your assets and create a brilliant succession plan. And I can be as detailed as the client wants. Some clients put very specific restrictions on money, and some are very broad. Um, the other trust that's most commonly used, as you said, is an irrevocable trust. And that's a trust where you're not in charge, where you have appointed somebody else to be in charge of the family company. Um, and the idea of that is you're transferring these assets over to a trustee. And in most cases, the trustee that people select is usually one of their children, because the children are usually their beneficiaries anyway. So for example, you create an irrevocable trust, you appoint your son as the trustee, and they're going to hold those assets for you for your benefit during your lifetime. And like a revocable trust, it's a succession plan. It dictates where the trust assets go upon your death. The difference is people use irrevocable trusts for asset protection purposes and, more importantly, for Medicaid qualification purposes.
That's a great answer. Thank you. So that's a great time for us to take a break. And I know Dominic and I want to talk to you on the second half of the show about some of the estate tax numbers sunsetting. And again, just your opinion, what you think might happen.
Sure thing.
Let's take a quick break. We'll be right back with the Lebenthal Report and Harold Bollaci. All right, I'm Michael Hartzman. I'm back with my partner, Dominic Tavella, and our guest this evening, Harold Bollaci. Dominic, I'm going to throw to you. I know you're anxious to ask Harold about some of the goings on at the end of this year as the estate tax laws are scheduled to sunset at the end of the year.
Yeah, and the great unknown, right, Mike? So I believe it was under the prior Trump administration, they gave us some pretty liberal, we call them estate taxes. I think most clients know them as death taxes. And what it did is it allowed most Americans not to have to deal with, at least on the federal level, paying taxes on their assets when they died. But those laws are going to expire by December 31st of this year if they don't do anything. So, what are we looking at here, Harold? This could be pretty dramatic, could be pretty scary stuff.
It could be very scary stuff, because if they don't do anything, it's going to cost a lot of Americans a lot of money when they pass away. I was just thinking as you were introducing the segment, you're thinking back to when I started my career, when New York, I think their estate tax, our estate tax exemption was 600 or eight hundred thousand
Yeah, about
dollars.
600,000
Yeah,
there.
up to
And
six.
if you owned a nice home in Nassau County, you were getting hit with an estate tax event in New York, and it's quite punishing for a lot of people, and surprising for a lot of people because to have a $600,000 home, most people didn't think, oh, God, I'm that rich that I have to pay an estate tax on that. But thankfully, New York caught on and it has been a little bit more generous in upping their exemptions. Just for your listeners' edification, currently for 2025, the federal estate tax exemption is 14 million per person. So that's 28 million per couple, which is I think fairly generous. I don't know how many Americans would fit in that category. And in New York State, it's going up to 7.17 million um, for 2025. So you'll see that New York is about half the federal level. And it's always interesting to try to speculate on what legislators will do. And I'm always fascinated at how interested people are in the estate tax. Even though most of us don't have to pay it, it's something that we're interested in. It's something most people don't like. Aspirationally, we all think we're going to be rich and we don't want to be taxed more if and when we become rich. So I think it's something that a lot of people put too much energy into thinking about. Uh, but in saying that, I would say there's a certain segment of our population that should give it some very, very serious consideration. Um, Regrettably, I've seen clients pay millions of dollars in estate taxes, um, generally because somebody who went before them didn't do proper planning. And look, some people are just so rich that there's nothing they can do to
Yeah,
avoid
but
estate tax.
Harold, and I don't want to jump on Mike's commentary here, but you mentioned a house in Nassau County or Suffolk County, but
Yeah.
think about their house, think about their IRA accounts, their investment portfolios, the value of their businesses. I mean, I can go on, right? The idea that you're like, well, I'm not really that wealthy, but on paper, it may not be that hard to get to $5 to $10 million of net worth. Mike, you want to jump on that one?
Well, Dom, what did we say? What did we say in the beginning of the show? The stock market's been up 20% 2 years in a row. Dom, how many portfolios do we manage where clients have $4, 5, $6 million with us?
You know,
Just in the stock market.
again, think of, and I'm not even talking about the super rich, right? We're just talking about what I think to be, good, high quality, earning, blue collar, white collar people that we work for a living, right? And the
Yeah,
value of your home has gone up, and the value of your 401k and your portfolio has gone up. And I come back to this idea of a small business owner. The value of your business has gone up. And somebody passes away, and I know you've heard it, Harold, where the children are like, I didn't think my parents were that wealthy.
right. They've lived in the same Levitt Cape for 60 years. Dad never bought a new car, and he's got $12 million. Well, yeah, because he worked and the business evolved. And one of my favorite things is to meet with people, and I'm sure you do this all the time, but people are so humble. I'll look across the table and say, you got a few $1 million. You're doing all right. Oh, no, no, no. Add it up. Add up. You have 750 in an IRA, $1 million house. Yeah, you can get to that number quite easily. And it's a fairly common. And I like what you're saying about small business owners and just the value of compounding as people live longer and get into their 80s and get that extra decade of compounding in these 20% years. Yeah, you have a lot of people with a lot of wealth out there, and as we keep saying, I want your family to keep as much of your money as you can when you pass. So planning prudently is a good thing to do. So perhaps we should talk about some tax mitigation strategies, unless you want to talk about speculation first. I think the Congress is going to at least hold the line. I think, as we said, this is an issue people attach themselves to, even if they have no chance of getting to that level. They want it. They want to know that if they become rich, that they're not going to get overtaxed by the government. So I think they're going to at least maintain the current levels with maybe a gradual increase. Um, it's not a huge revenue raiser for the government, so it doesn't hurt them to be generous with us because it's not a big line item when it comes to revenue sources.
I agree with you, and I was smiling before because I've sat in a conference room with you at least 100 times, and you look at my client dead in the eye and say, "You're a wealthy person." You never are reluctant to just deal with the elephant in the room.
Celebrate it. God bless you. Have a few $1,000,000. Celebrate it. I'm not telling you to go out and spend it all, but goodness, for goodness sake, at least appreciate the value of your work and that you achieve this. Yeah, I love those moments, and I love being with you for those moments. It's
And I have to also thank you because you also frequently say, "Thanks to Mike and Dom." So I always appreciate that plug as well. So
So
give credit where credit's due. Absolutely.
You kind of brought it up, Harold, but the analogy I'm going to use is I don't know if you guys are big fans of Yellowstone, but in the last episode, they had to sell the family ranch because the tax liability was so large. And frankly, it was lack of planning, right? They had hinted at it during almost the entire show that they would have to do some estate planning to make sure they were able to pay the tax liability. And I think, it was part of a show and we all took it in stride, but we have a lot of clients that are small business owners. And if you ask them, are you a millionaire? They'll go, no, come on, I'm not. But they own a business that might be worth 10 or 20 or $30 million, right? What happens to that family business that they've worked an entire lifetime for if they have that tax liability?
It can be so punishing. First of all, I think we have to give a spoiler alert for those of us who haven't finished binge watching Yellowstone. So now we know how it ends.
No, 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 no. I
No.
didn't give away
Oh,
the I didn't
oh,
give
you
away
didn't give
the
away the
ending.
ending.
Nope.
Okay.
Nope. I didn't give away the ending.
We should probably give a disclaimer at the
The
beginning of the
spoiler
show.
alert would be telling you how they
he,
solved the problem. But
All
we're
right.
not going to
So,
talk about that.
he,
That's
he
let's
another
gave you a
show.
he gave you a nerdy spoiler alert. He may
that's
have an estate tax problem.
so let's give
Yeah,
some people
that's when I was sharing with my wife on the couch. Oh, honey, they have an estate tax problem. That was very romantic on my part, but well, that's another conversation. Harold,
so
how do we fix this?
it's hard. There's no quick fix, and especially when you get to that point and you look over and you tell the client, "Wow, you got a $40 million business." The valuation's already in your name. It's really hard to reduce that valuation, especially on a small business. Um, there are a few things that I like to do just for general estate tax mitigation. One of those is including what's called a Santa Claus clause in your last will and testament. And what that does is that allows your executor to give away part of your estate to charity to bring it below the estate tax threshold. So it prevents the payment of estate taxes by giving that difference to charity. And so for people who are, you're not going to give $10 million to charity probably to save $250,000 in taxes, but maybe you give 75,000 to charity to save $250,000 in taxes by bringing the estate back down below the estate tax threshold. So that's a must-have for goodwill planning. Some clients have to take out insurance to mitigate estate taxes. We've had these conversations with our mutual clients where sometimes it's worth buying that $5 million policy at whatever the premiums are so that there's liquidity there to pay estate taxes. Because what happens if there's no liquidity? Then you're selling assets, possibly experiencing capital gains tax events, and it just turns into this vicious cycle of waste. Um, the best way, at least in my opinion, to mitigate estate taxes is while you're on that path, try to capture assets that you think are going to appreciate dramatically into an irrevocable trust and capture that gain outside of your taxable estate. And that's a pretty broad stroke. We've talked about gifting before. We should mention that individuals can give $19,000 per person this year. That's gone up, and that's gone up about $1,000 a year for the past several years. So if you're on the margins of a possible estate tax event, you can unload a couple $100,000 in gifting through giving, a husband and wife giving away 19,000 each during the year. That can bring you down a couple of 100,000. And that's sometimes all it needs to reduce the estate tax. But that's one of the ways that people should use. Other than that, it's insurance, and insurance gets really pricey, but it's sometimes worth it.
And just getting back to the gifting, anyone could gift to anybody else. So, I'll always ask a client, how do you get along with your son-in-law or your daughter-in-law? Because yes, you could give your child 38,000, but if you wanted to, you could give your in-law, you could give your grandchildren, you could give it to anybody.
I'll take it. Yeah, absolutely.
And
And
in grandchildren, how we've done this for our clients, you can create a trust for those grandchildren and gift the 38,000 into that trust.
absolutely. And, we just turned over the calendar year, but if there was an urgency to this, you could have done it on the 31st and the 2nd and gotten, a double whammy out of it. So that could significantly. And again, the gifting is more for people who are on the cusp of possibly having an estate tax event, or see that they maybe, their portfolios are growing by 20% a year, and they just want to kind of hold the line at the current levels so that they don't go over it depending on how the laws change. So gifting is really for people who are on the margins, I think, of a possible estate tax event.
And on the flip side of that, we sometimes have to stop people from gifting because of the clawback, because they may think, go, grandma's terminally ill, she wants to give away $100,000, but we don't expect her to be here by May. Like, well, I'm not, and she's on Medicare, or they want to put her on Medicare, and I'm not 100% sure that's going to fly. So could you touch on that real quick as well?
I want you to clarify the question on Medicare or Medicaid.
Well, you have a client who they want to put on Medicare, but they want to remove them from their assets. So they say to us, well, grandma's going to give away 100 grand. Could you open up 5 accounts for me? And each one's going to get 19 grand. But, they're going on Medicare because they're doing some end of life planning, right? And then isn't there the risk that the government comes along and says, well, that wasn't really a gift as much
Oh,
as it
certainly.
was to hide or get rid of this money before we could get to it?
Certainly, if they're looking for institutional care, the government would definitely claw that back. It would be seen as, I don't like to use the word fraudulent because that sounds like it's intentionally bad, but the regulations don't permit you to do that. I think the regulations are quite generous, especially if you need some type of home care. We haven't talked about Medicaid. Can we give it 90 seconds or
Yeah, we got 4 minutes, so go have at
yeah.
it.
So why would you be doing that? You might be putting assets into an irrevocable trust because you want to qualify mom or dad for home care, and you want Medicaid to pay for it because your mom's income can't pay for it, and you want an aide to come in and help take care of mom. So if you're applying for community Medicaid, and that's Medicaid, so that's the medical insurance for people who are in the community. By definition, you're at home. So people are always concerned with what's the look back. I don't want to get penalized. How many years do I have to wait and give away all my money before I can go to a nursing home? The current regulations are 5 years. If you need to go to a nursing home and you don't want to pay for it, you need to transfer all of your assets out of your name for 5 years. And you can't go and interrupt it. If you go and do something in year 3, you run the risk of resetting the clock or getting penalized. But that's only for a nursing home. If you need home care, you can transfer your assets out of your name into an irrevocable trust today, and we can get you home care in 30 to 60 days. The regulations are very generous when it comes to home care. the risks that you run are severalfold. If you're receiving an entitlement and you haven't made the transfers properly, the government may claw that money back. And the other risk that you run, if you're on an entitlement and you pass away with assets and you submit a will or do an administration proceeding, New York figured it out. That's their trigger to come collect on what they've spent on your care already. So um, they the you'll get a letter from the attorney general saying you owe us $400,000 from mom's estate because we gave her $400,000 in care before she died. So having that timing done correctly is important, but also probate avoidance is important for these things because it's the submission of the will to the court that triggers the attorney general notice. If your assets are already in trust and you owe the government money, there's no triggering event, so that money doesn't get paid. And by the way, that's legal and it's fair because you've made the transfers during your lifetime to your trustee. So the timing's important. And I've seen people get clawed back. It's not pretty because sometimes the money's not there to grab. And then how are you going to pay for it?
Oh, do we have about a minute? Dominic and I, have your cards with us always, but how do people get hold of you if they want to learn more or to retain your services?
That's really generous of you to ask. Thank you. BollaciLaw.com or 516-538-9700 direct.
Dom, anything else you want to close
Yeah,
with?
I'd like to put a cherry on a cake here, and that's just pull out your documents. It's really not that hard. Find the will at the back of the drawer, open it up, read it. Look who your executor or executrix is. Look who your beneficiaries are. And if it's all good, put it back in the drawer. But if it's not, pick up the phone, call one of us, and we'll happily guide you on how to get it updated.
The worst thing to happen is you come in and I say, this looks great. You're in good shape. Keep in touch. I love those conversations too. I like to see, it gives me great pleasure to see that people have done good planning, regardless of who's done it. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, you guys have definitely put a cherry on it. Harold, thank you very much for helping us kick off our 2025 podcast series of the Lebenthal Report.
Great to be on. Thanks for having me. Happy New Year, everybody.
Happy New Year, all.
Happy New Year, everyone. And Dominic and I will be back next week with another edition of the Lebenthal Report. Have a good night, everyone.